proud of it. Federal workers are the quiet patriots who do the government's business. They carry out the laws and regulations that are passed by the Congress that you've elected and signed by the President that you've elected, and they do the best job that they can with what they have. If you don't like the laws that are out there, vote those guys out. I encourage you. I represent no comments that are approved by my agency. In fact, I haven't gone through a public affairs officer of my agency or any agency of the government. I'm just coming forward with my opinions and what I think ought to be done and ought not to be done, and reflections and various news stories that affect federal workers and everybody else. This actually hasn't been too bad a week for the federal worker. I'm taking a look at the Federal Employee News Digest, which, by the way, is a very, very good summary of what's going on in Congress and how it affects the federal worker. It has a lot of information from the unions, but it's not sponsored by the unions. Seems to be a private corporation. And they also have a web page called Club Fed, which is any of you federal workers are out there who have a computer, I strongly suggest that you call it up and take a look at it. Very good news for the federal workers still working. They're still going to take about $10 billion out of your paychecks and out of your retirements over the next 7 years, but it's been reconfigured, and the two absolutely worst features of the House and Senate plans have gone away, and I think that everybody is going to be very, very pleased about it who belong and work for the federal government. The reconciliation bill is right now in a House-Senate conference. They're going to decide what the budget is going to be for the next 7 years, and then they're going to give it to the President. I've been talking about the budget for the last 3 sessions, and for good reason. I don't believe there's anything more important going on that affects the federal worker and affects the American people as well. What the Republicans are offering is a sea change, and I'm not sure people really want some of the changes that they're advocating. Among the things that did get passed is a 0.5% increase in the amount that you, the federal worker, is going to pay into your retirement account, which for all intents and purposes is a 0.5% cut in your pay, and that's probably not a good thing. Basically, you're taking a cut in pay in order to give money to somebody else, and there's plenty of tax cuts on the horizon, mostly going to the wealthy. Even the $500 per child tax cut is going to go disproportionately to the wealthy. People up to, households up to $200,000 are going to benefit according to the Senate plan. And it looks like the Senate plan is more likely to pass as a final version than the House plan. Now, that doesn't mean that the President's going to sign any of this. Probably the real hard bargaining will happen after they submit it. How long is it going to take? Maybe 6 to 8 weeks. We don't know. And meanwhile, they're playing around with the full faith and credit of the United States as far as the debt limit is concerned, and this is another big problem. And it's a problem I talked about last week, but I don't think I'm going to get into too much this week. Okay, first the bad news. Bad news is that you're going to have a, for all intents and purposes, a pay cut of 0.5%. It's going to come in over 3 years, and it's going to be an increase into the amount that the federal worker pays into his retirement. 0.25% more of salary will be paid in January 1996. It's just a couple months away, so that's a 0.25% pay cut for all intents and purposes. Another 0.15% comes in 1997. Another 0.1% comes in 1998. Now, the worst news as far as that's concerned is the Senate version, which seems to be the version that's going to go through, is going to come up with a 1.5% increase in the agency contribution to your retirement. What does this mean? This means that your agency is going to have 1.5% less to spend. And are they going to reduce that spending on the actual mission? If you work for the Social Security Administration, are they going to send out 1.5% fewer checks? Absolutely not. Probably that 1.5% is going to come out of your hide, and is going to come out of federal workers being laid off or cut in one way or another. This could be very, very bad. We don't know exactly where they're going to get the money. They could take it out of training. They could take it out of overhead. They could take it out of all different kinds of things. Whether they take it out of management jobs is very, very unlikely, but is also a possibility, to give them some credit. The other big cut that was really, really worrying me and worrying a lot of federal workers was going from high 3 to high 5. What does that mean? It means when you retire, they calculate your retirement based on the highest 3 years of salary that you've had during your lifetime as a federal worker. And that includes an average of all of the within grade increases and various other pay increases, promotions, or whatever you've had in the last 3 years. They were going to go from high 3 to high 5. And that high 5 was going to cut 4 to 6% of the annuity that was going to get paid out. That does not look like that's going to make it through the House Senate conference, and that's a good thing. So that was really something that's going to hurt. Now, to make up for that, what they're going to do is they're going to postpone the retirees' cost increase, or COLA, from January of every year to April of every year. And that's going to actually push cut into every single year that the retiree is going to get paid. So you absolutely, the person who's out there actually retired is going to be picking up some of that loss, and that's not going to be good for them. There are some other things that are going to happen. The plan to delay inflation for these people that are already retired is probably going to cost the average annuitant, which means the average retiree, about $600. If he's receiving a $2,000 a month annuity, he's going to lose about $900. And of course, that figure varies by future inflation. The 0.5% of salary is going to lose you too. That's going to lose the present federal worker about $1,300 over the 7-year period. Now, if you have a relatively high salary and you're up in the 13 or 14, she has 13 or 14 range, you're probably going to lose more than $3,000. That money is going to go to someone else's tax cut, and there's no doubt about that. As I said the previous week, that everybody, in my opinion, is for balancing the budget. And everybody would like to see the budget get balanced. But when you throw in a tax cut that benefits some people and not others, then everybody who gets cut has a perfect right to say and to feel and to think, my money, my loss, is going to somebody else's pocket. And they have a perfect right to feel somewhat resentful of that fact. It doesn't make sense. Balancing the budget should be a patriotic act that everybody should be invested in. Should hurt everybody a little bit and nobody too much. And that's not how they're handling this entire balanced budget situation. And that is really going to hurt. The dropping of the high 5 salary base is a great thing for federal workers. Average federal worker was going to lose $13,200 in his ultimate lifetime, and that did not get passed. And I, for one, am very, very pleased about that. The actual bill that funds the federal workers, which is the Treasury Postal Measure, H.R. 2020, it remains stalled, and that hasn't gotten passed. And the reason it's stalled is because of the ISTOOK amendment. And that ISTOOK amendment is an amendment that limits lobbying by private nonprofit organizations that receive some federal grants in some cases. And it's a pretty bizarre, very, very bureaucratic system that this fellow has put together. His name is Ernest Jim ISTOOK Jr. He's a congressman and a very, very conservative Republican who's supposed to be against tremendous bureaucracy. And he's written a bill to try to get at nonprofit foundations that he feels are too liberal or support elderly people and support poor people. And he's going to get these groups, and he's going to run them out of the public advocacy business. And what it would do, it would restrict nonprofit organizations with budgets more than $3 million from using even their own money to engage in political advocacy. That definition is not only lobbying, but virtually any contact with federal, state, or local legislators or regulators, which is just about everything that anybody does. For all intents and purposes, he could probably throw me off the air under the ISTEC amendment. This is a disaster, also affected, and this is very, very important, by the bill, the way this guy wrote it, is groups that do not receive direct federal grants but hire or buy anything from another organization that spends more than 15% of its money on political advocacy. IBM has objected to that because they have thousands and thousands of vendors, and they're not going to know if they're if they're breaking the law or not when this thing passes. It's an absolute bureaucratic nightmare that's completely impossible to enforce, and basically would put every single company, every single corporation right on the block, create a tremendous bureaucracy. Maybe I should be for it, because thousands and thousands of federal workers be able to go into every single company in the entire country and try to find out whether they're doing business with nonprofit organizations that spend 15% of their fund money on political advocacy. I can assure you, you'd be hard-pressed to find a defense contractor or anything else that could put up or possibly deal with a law like this. And he's hurting a lot of Republicans as well as Democrats, and he's absolutely intent on it. One of the organizations that he's out to get here is called the National Council of Senior Citizens, which apparently gets a lot of federal grants in order to do various services for senior citizens, and apparently is advocating and fighting the cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. And he has a perfect right to oppose this private organization any way he wants to. But to create a new bureaucracy and to create a burden on companies and a burden on the people and limit the organization's rights is ridiculous. And it's holding up the Treasury postal bill, and it's holding up your and my funding for the jobs that we have. And it seems to be completely ridiculous to me. And I don't know, maybe there's Republicans out there who can justify this kind of bill as being a conservative measure, an anti-bureaucratic measure. But to me, this particular idea of going in there and trying to control the activities of nonprofit groups and to go further and to control what companies are dealing with and what company and what vendor is spending 15% of its money on federal advocacy, and who's going to know that, and what businesses of IBM or Hughes or GM or any large corporation, whether their vendor spends 15% on public advocacy or not. Is every single company supposed to put in a public advocacy monitor? Boy, that would be a great little bit of bureaucratic cost addition. It's completely ridiculous, and it's holding everything up. This guy is absolutely intent on putting this through, and he has a group of, let's say, 60 or 90, I don't know the exact number, of freshman Republicans, so-called conservative congressmen who are going to hold up any possible deal, going to vote against any budget that doesn't include this amendment. To me, I don't really understand why anybody would go ahead with this and how anybody could possibly enforce this. It just seems to me to be a bureaucratic nightmare. Federal grant recipients ranging from giant corporations like General Motors to disaster victims who receive emergency federal assistance, and the contractors they hire would be open for question under this law. And there's no way of knowing the situation. IBM says, IBM spokesman Edmund F. Perry says, with literally thousands of vendors to whom IBM may have had made disbursements. Absolutely nobody knows what the effect of this bill would be. And it's a nutty one, there's no doubt about it. However, when you have a situation where there are extremists out there and the extremists are willing to do whatever they need to do in order to further their position, this is what happens. And I think it's very, very important, responsible members of Republican senators trying to dump this amendment, and they may or may not be able to succeed. I certainly hope they do. One of the houses, the Senate did not have this in their bill, and let's hope it doesn't make it through, because it is really bad. Bad news for the Republicans and bad news for the Democrats. The bad news for the Democrats, because Democrats are fleeing to the GOP left and right. There have been 137 defections around the nation, mostly local officials, state legislators, mayors, and so on and so forth. It's also included two U.S. Senators, 3 U.S. representatives, 43 state legislators, 7 mayors, 5 sheriffs, and 4 constables, of all things, have all dumped out of the Democratic Party and dumped into the Republican Party. And this is great for Republicans. I don't have a problem with it, but there may be they may have a problem later on, because in the same issue there's a very small article that says women and the elderly are actively rejecting the GOP positions. A poll taken by the Times Mirror showed that 50% of Americans disapprove of policies advocated by the Republican leaders in Congress. Only 36% approve. Over 65 years old, the elderly vote Republican and vote in disproportionate numbers. 57% disapprove the Republican-controlled Congress, whereas previously it was only 49%. And 52% of the women disapprove of the Republican agenda, and that is up from 47% disapproval a few months ago. So a lot of these things, especially the attack on Medicare, $270 billion cut, is starting to hurt. And I went over the whole Republican plan to try to make the Medicare cuts more palatable, and this whole discussion about what they can say and what the magic words they are. And the word cut, of course, is not in their vocabulary. To protect, to preserve, and to strengthen Medicare, keep it from being destroyed, and that's basically what they're saying. That whole argument doesn't seem to be holding water. People don't seem to be buying it, but we'll see what happens. Part of the Republican plan and budget plan is really a tax increase. And there are a number of places where there's tax increases in the plan, and one of the worst is the earned income tax credit. The earned income tax credit is basically a tax credit that working poor people make. But is it completely working poor? No, it apparently goes all the way up to $28,000. And though a lot of people don't take advantage of it, and there are a lot of thieves out there that are using other people's Social Security numbers to steal this earned income tax credit, the earned income tax credit helps and restores and is a tax cut for working people that don't make a lot of money. And among these working people that don't make a lot of money are enlisted men in the services. And I have an article here from the Air Force Times that says that a Senate plan to reduce the tax credit for the working poor would hit hardest low-ranking enlisted members who have 2 or more children, and also single service members receiving child support. And I think this is just another example of the real patriots getting hurt, because for some reason that I personally don't understand, instead of just having everybody come in there and get out of the wagon, as Phil Gramm says, and begin pulling it, they had to throw in a tax cut so that some people are going to sit in that wagon and they're going to get more. And there's no doubt about it. There's going to be a tax cut for capital gains, which might, under different circumstances, be fine, and maybe there might be a tax shift that could pay for it. But in this circumstance, it's just taking food out of one person's mouth and giving it to another fat person. And I don't understand it. I think it's ridiculous. There's also an increase in the inheritance tax, or a decrease in the inheritance tax, where the inheritance tax exemption is going to go from $600,000, the first $600,000 of a person's estate is exempt from federal tax, inheritance tax. That would go up to $750,000. And that would be paid for by cutting this person and cutting that person, and shouldn't be part of a balanced budget system. If there's money left over after you've balanced the budget, fine. You can include all the tax cuts you want. But here, the earned income tax credit cut is actually a tax increase, and it's a tax increase on the people who shouldn't have to pay more taxes, working families, and it's a tax decrease for people who most likely could afford to pay some more taxes, or at least don't need to pay less. The biggest change in this earned income tax credit is that money received as child support is counted into the minimum. So that if a service member, a woman has children, and her child support is going to be costed in there, so that her level of income is going to go over the level that qualifies her for the earned income tax credit. That's going to hurt a lot of military people, especially women in the military. Also, they're going to decrease this income cap to $23,731 from over $25,000, and that's going to take a lot of the enlisted people, especially as inflation increases the salary. It's a 2% increase this year, and is going to cut people out of getting their earned income tax credit. And where's that money going to go? It's going to go to somebody else's tax break. And in another circumstance, I might not have a problem. In fact, I don't have a problem with cutting the capital gains. I don't have a problem with a larger exemption. That money should be taken from other taxes that should be increased on people that really don't put too much into the system. But to say that the enlisted men of the United States military, the people who are going to put their lives in danger, are those people who are sitting inside that wagon, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I think that anybody who, or the congressmen that thought this up, and the senators that thought this up, should be ashamed of themselves and should dump it out. Now, there's a couple other things going on, and that's going to affect military retirees especially. They're talking about taking CHAMPUS, which is the military retirement medical plan, and putting these people over to Medicare when they're 65, and then of course they're cutting Medicare. And they're saying that the cuts in Medicare are going to affect these military retirees quite a bit, and that's going to hurt them quite a bit. There's a bunch of other things going on in the federal situation. I'll tell you a piece of good news for anybody who has a TSP account. And TSP is the system where you can, it's kind of like a federal 401k program. People, especially in the FERS, the new retirees, are really creating their own retirement with it, and they're being hurt quite a bit. But the good news for them, and CSRS, the people in the old retirement system, could put up to 5% of their income into the same TSP accounts, is that the C fund, which is the stock fund, returned 29.64% over the 12-month period, and that is a pretty good improvement. Now, there's a bill that's going forward, which I support. It's called H.R. 2306, and it's put forward by Representative Constance Morella, and that is to take out the percent limit to put money into your TSP account. Now, the first people will still get their 5% match, but they'll be able to put in tax-free a dollar amount instead of a limit, and the CSRS people would be able to put in as much as the FERS people. Now, the CSRS people don't get a match. I'll have to talk about this more next week. The time is running out. My name is Red Vern, and the name of this show is Fed Pride, and because I'm proud to be a federal worker. Thank you very much.